Radio Bath.
And this is Cynthia Wiharja, host of Brave Business Conversation. We have on the line Roger Leitch. He is a mayor's guide around Bath. He's so knowledgeable about history and stories around Bath, which just makes it also interesting. He himself is a world traveler, a bit of an adventurer, and most importantly, he's a personal friend of mine. I think that's most important. Hi, Roger. Welcome to the show.
Good afternoon. Thank you for all that. I'm not sure I'm that knowledgeable about Bath.
Well, I put you under the pressure.
Yes, you are. Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about yourself, your interests, and basically, just tell us about yourself.
Well, I was born in Bath, and so some of my earliest memories are of Bath. I was in Abbey Square recently, and there was a young lady there, very small, about 2 feet tall, chasing the pigeons. And I was thinking, one of my earliest memories have been about that size and chasing the pigeons in Abbey Square. And
Wow.
My father was sent to Germany just after the war as part of the occupying forces. He was a civilian, but supporting the occupying forces. And as a result of that, my parents' marriage broke up. I can barely remember them together,
Wow.
But anyway, he met and subsequently married a Danish lady. And when I was 4, in 1947, the dust had settled regarding the divorce and separation and so on. And my mother put me on an aeroplane at Northolt Airport, and my father took me off in Copenhagen. And I met my stepmother for the first time, or stepmother-to-be as it was for the first time. And this was to be an annual event. I went across to Europe, to Germany or Denmark, every year until I was 10 years old when my father came back to this country.
Wow.
So that started my travels. And since then, I've always been interested in traveling, and I've visited every continent. I've been around the world.
You've done sailing around the world as well.
I sailed around the world, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
It's amazing. How has that whole adventurous lifestyle and seeing the world, how has that affected you think?
Well, I think I never had much confidence as a child, although by the time I was in my 50s, when I went round, people said, oh, this is a character-building exercise. And I thought, well, I'm sure by now my character's built pretty well. But
you weren't doing it for the Duke of Edinburgh Award, obviously.
Sorry?
You weren't doing it for the Duke of Edinburgh Award at that age, probably.
No, not anymore, no. But I think it probably did change me. It's a bit difficult for me to tell.
Tell us
but it was a great adventure.
Yeah, you're being a mayor's guide. I remember, when I first came to Bath, what you do is you meet the mayor's guide tour. You do the mayor's guide tour in front of the pump room. I mean, that's just what you do. And when you first come to Bath, how did you start doing that? And what got you interested in all that?
Well, I was a university lecturer, and I did enjoy being in the classroom and teaching. And we visited Bath on one occasion and heard about the mayor's guides, and we did a tour. And I thought I could do this. And Jane, too, she said, oh, this might be something that interests you. And when we moved to Bath, long after I was retired, and 12 or 13 years ago now, I thought, well, I need something to amuse myself. So I went and became a guide. And I've been doing it ever since.
That's amazing.
About once a week. I go out about once a week. Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. You must. Did you know everything about Bath at that time, or did being a mayor's guide actually teach you?
I knew a certain amount, and I bought a few books and read stuff up. And the mayor's guides keep in touch with each other, and there's a magazine we can contribute which has articles in it about Bath, and people will write an article about Bonash or about the Royal Crescent or whatever it is that takes their fancy. And you hear little stories, you pick up little stories that you tell. Having lived in Bath, it gives me an edge sometimes. And one of the things, for example, people ask about the Bath Stone, which comes out of the hills near here. Mm-hmm. And when Ralph Allen got the rights to the Bath Stone, everybody said, oh, it's pretty useless, it's too soft, But when I was a child, when we were going to the swimming pool and we were getting bored, waiting before we went in, we would take a coin and we'd grind it against the stones of the swimming pool, out of the wall outside, and make little pits in the wall with a stone. With a coin. That's how soft it is, that a child can dig holes in it with a coin. Of course, a lot of people don't know that, but being a child here, that was one of the stories I can tell.
And it's soft, but it's such a useful stone. A lot of construction walls are made out of that, so it's also very strong. And
it is. It's very nice, but it is quite soft. You can cut it with a saw. I've seen stonemasons cutting it with a saw. But it's very famous. It went to Bristol, and some of it even went to North America. There are buildings in North America that are
really. So Bath was a stone industry. Yeah.
Yes. I guess you could say that, yes. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, I never knew that. I thought Bath stone was just in Bath and we use it around Bath. I didn't think there was enough to export anywhere. Yeah, but I used to be in the cleaning and sanitation industry, and stones like Bath stone is hell to maintain. Because it will absorb everything. It's basically sandstone or limestone, or I think it's more of a sandstone if I look at it. It's porous. It'll absorb everything. You don't want your floors made out of it. It crumbles.
Yes, wears easily. Yes,
and you've got little children carving it with coins. It's annoying. Yeah. We'll be back. And,
it could be worse if you go to Exeter. The west face of Exeter Cathedral is. All the statues, their faces are worn away because of the prevailing winds are from the west, and
that's true.
That's true. The soft stone gets worn very easily.
Yeah, it's quite windy. That's why the rugby pitch, the Sandy Park, is known for how windy it is. So if you're not Exeter Chiefs, you'll have a very difficult time playing a game there. And they've got kind of a home advantage because they know how to work the wind.
They know how the wind works.
Yeah. Roger, I want to have you back after all this music. I just want to have you tell a few stories about what life in Bath was in the Bonash days. What was tourism like? Let's take us all on a little audio mayor's guide, if you will. I think that will be fascinating for the listeners, because many of listeners, we live in Bath, but not necessarily everybody knows what Bath is all about and how it was. So we'll be back after this with Roger Leitch.
Across Bath, Chippenham and Melksham, this is Radio Bath.
And we're back with Roger Leitch at Brave Business Conversations. I'm always fascinated about the history of Bath, Roger. What do you find interesting? Tell us some stories about how Bath was like in the Bonash days.
Oh dear. What can I say? Well, North Parade, for example, parade because after lunch, after their main meal, the visitors to Bath, they would come to Bath to take the waters, and they would stay in all the big houses which had been built to house these tourists. So they're really holiday homes for the rich. The fancy houses in Bath were built as holiday homes for the rich, and they would go down to the baths in the morning where they would have a good soak, and they had their main meal nearer the middle of the day than we do. And then they would go for a brief walk in the afternoon. They weren't great walkers, and so they would parade down. And North Parade was a favourite. The very wide pavements, of course, is so they could stride around, show off their wealth, all their fine clothes and their fine jewellery and all the rest of it.
Was the Parade Gardens built then?
And sorry?
Was the Parade Gardens built then?
Yes, they were. They were partly built anyway. But the north side, North Parade, was popular because it was in the shade. Because, of course, in those days, you didn't get a suntan. Because the only people who had a suntan were people who worked for a living. Because if you worked for a living, you almost certainly worked on the land. Or something to do with the land. So you were outside a lot. So if you were pale, the message you were putting across was, I don't have to work. I don't have to be outside. I can afford to stay inside. So you avoided getting a suntan, so you paraded in North Parade. Unlike today, where everybody works inside in offices, and we all rush down to the south of France to try and get a nice suntan in the summer. Yeah.
Or the Royal Crescent, whichever lawn is closer.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
Yeah,
yes.
It is interesting though, isn't it? When you have, pale skin was one of it. I think it's also when you can do certain things like knitting and everything. That means you have leisure time. When you can paint, that means you have that signifies in society that you have leisure time. You're not working class. And what era, what year are you talking about when people paraded? Is that 1700s?
Well, Bath became popular in the 18th century. And we had visits from Charles II. He came to Bath because the Bath was a very quiet place. It had a certain amount of industry, but not very much. It had a certain amount of wealth from the wool trade, but it had the baths, and the waters in the baths were supposed to be able to cure you of almost anything. And Charles II came because he wanted a son to be king after him. And his wife appeared to be sterile. He knew it wasn't his fault. He had a dozen or so illegitimate children. And,
just to test it out.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Yes, yeah. So he came to Bath, but it didn't do any good. And when he died, James II became king, his brother. Right. And he had a similar problem. He'd been married and he had daughters by his first wife. And but his second wife wasn't producing. Anyway, he came to Bath with her. And with him it was successful. And when he was here, his wife, Mary of Modena, fell pregnant and produced a son. And so he was very happy. But unfortunately, and of course the town was happy too. Look, it works. The Bath waters work. Unfortunately, he was a Catholic and not very popular. And now he'd got a son. He's, the next king would be a Catholic as well. So they got together and threw him out at the Glorious Revolution. And his nephew, William of Orange, Duke William of Orange in the Netherlands, became king. And William was married to James's daughter, Mary. And so they became king and queen. And I must say there must have been some interesting conversations around the dinner table in that family, mustn't there? Talk about a family squabble there.
Yeah, well, it's going back to Charles' lineage, I guess.
Yeah. Anyway, they came to Bath, and later on, when they died, Anne became queen, and she came to Bath. And of course, where royalty goes, the rich and famous like to go as well, and be seen in the same places.
Where would they stay? Royalty, where would they stay in Bath?
I don't know in those days. There certainly wasn't the grand houses weren't built then. And it was when Bath started becoming popular and the tourists were coming that they started building places like North Parade and South Parade and Queen's Square and later on the Royal Crescent and further up the hill with Lansdowne Crescent and so on. But where King Charles would have stayed, I don't know. I
wouldn't be
know,
the Pulteney Street or something like that, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's fascinating. Well, I want to come back with more stories. Of course, I want to know a little bit more about Beau Nash, what types of things that he was up to. Because I know for certain somebody has a shop, and it is now an antique silver shop. But back in the days, it was a tea house, quote unquote, where it wasn't really just selling tea. So let's, Bath apparently was a town where people came for pleasure. So let's talk more with Roger Leitch after this.
This is Radio Bath.
And it's actually fascinating. I look forward. I know a lot of the high street now, Milsom Street and everything like that is quite empty because a lot of people have closed down, unfortunately. But I'm also looking forward to having independents pop up, probably where chain shops used to be. And I think that will liven up the city a bit more. Because back then, back in the Beau Nash days, Bath was buzzing with tourism, wasn't it? I liken it to like a mini Las Vegas. It was kind of like pleasure tourism, wasn't it?
Oh, it was, yes. And people came for the baths. It was the baths that supposedly drew them here, but they would go to a ball 2 or 3 times a week. The assembly rooms were they weren't the only assembly rooms in Bath. They were where people could go. There were several assembly rooms. This is where people used to go to do their gambling and take tea. Tea was becoming popular, starting to become popular.
Right.
And there'd be a ball. They'd go to a ball every now and again. But one of the things that Beau Nash did, he insisted the balls should finish at 11 o'clock at night.
Why is that?
So there'd be no noise or rowdiness in the streets.
Oh, okay.
And
did
although
they continue
he was
their party elsewhere?
Yeah, they would have to. Yeah, sure. Although he had a reputation for, he was a gambler and a womanizer and a drunkard and goodness knows what else. But he was very powerful. He became known as the King of Bath. He was known as the King of Bath. And one of the stories about him, which is probably just a legend, an urban myth. He was at a ball and it reached 11 o'clock and he said, "All right, ladies and gentlemen, no, it's 11 o'clock. It's time to go home." And one of the ladies there said, "Oh, but Mr. Nash, we're having such a good time. Couldn't we have just one more dance?" And he said, "I'm sorry, madam, but it's 11 o'clock and the balls must finish at 11. And she said, "Oh, but I'm a princess." And he said, "And I'm the King of Bath." Well, go home.
Yeah. Not impressed. Next. Got to do much better than that. How did Beau Nash find Bath, or did Bath find him?
Well, he was sent to Oxford by his father. He wasn't a wealthy man, but obviously reasonably middle class. He was sent to Oxford and he was thrown out before the end of his first term for womanizing. And he was sent to, so his father sent him to London and he trained as a lawyer, but that was too much like hard work and he didn't like that. And I believe he joined the army for a while. And I don't know if he thought that the grand uniform, because of course in those days, army uniforms were very grand things. Whether he thought the army uniform would help him with his womanizing, but he didn't like that either. And he applied for and got the job of Deputy Master of Ceremonies in Bath. And the Master of Ceremonies' job was to look after all the wealthy visitors and make sure they were comfortable and there were places where they could gamble and all the rest of it. And so he came here as Deputy Master of Ceremonies, but his boss was killed in a duel when he'd only been here a few months.
Oh, there you go.
And so he got the top job. And he was very good at it. He was a very charismatic man, got on well with people and so on, and and made his life here. Yeah.
There's the story that a carriage would pull up and taking some guests to stay in Bath, and then he would greet the carriage and evaluate whether or not the guests could stay.
Oh, I wouldn't be surprised. I'd not heard that story, but I wouldn't be surprised.
He'd be like looking at the carriage, looking at the people, like, okay, you can stay, or no, move along. You can't stop and stay here. Just protecting the reputation of the city. What?
I wouldn't be surprised. Yes.
Was it because of him that all the entertainment industry was built in Bath? Or did he come when it was already pretty much settled?
Oh, I think he came when Bath was established as a tourist resort for the wealthy. By the time he came, but he did a lot for it. Although he lost his popularity later on, he didn't have much money compared with a lot of other people, and he used to make money by setting up the gambling and the gambling tables, the gaming as it was called, and he would take a slice of the action. He would take some of the stake. And they were very large. Some of these stakes were very large. There's a pub in Bath Wick which has got a bit of its history written on the walls. And it says that round about this time in the 18th century, it changed hands as part payment of a gambling debt of £19,000. Now, £19,000 200 or 300 years ago, it's probably worth $1 million or $2 million today.
Yeah. Which pub is
that?
Just
1% of a stake of £1 million would set me up for a while.
Which pub is that, if I may know?
Yeah. And so he earned his money that way. Anyway, things went wrong for him. He, first of all, the government made gambling illegal because all these wealthy people were supposed to be running the country, and here they were losing their fortunes to each other, and so weren't in a position to do that. So they made it illegal, and he lost that source of income. and he got involved in some court case, which he shouldn't have done, in which he lost a lot of money. And he lost his popularity, as a lot of charismatic people do. And he lived in the building which is now the Theatre Royal.
Yeah. Is the building that's next to the Theatre Royal, or is it the...
No, he lived in the building that was the Theatre Royal. And he moved, when things started going badly for him, he moved into the building next door, which is now a restaurant.
Yes.
With his mistress, or his ex-mistress, Juliana Popjoy. And what a name, Juliana Popjoy, you know.
I can't help it. That name is coined somehow.
Yeah, he lived there the rest of his life. And a few years ago, it's known as Popjoy's Restaurant. And if you go there, on the side, there's a little bit about them, and they say, you know, they used to entertain here. And maybe if you're lucky and it's a very dark night and so on, you might see a white figure of Juliana making sure that they're looking after their guests properly.
Oh, ghost stories. Roger, I'd like to sleep at night, please. Oh, but you know what? The ghost tours in Bath are amazing. I have yet, and only because of lockdown and everything was canceled, but I want to join the comedy tours as well. That I think they meet in front of the Huntsman, I think, with this pink bicycle. But we did join the ghost tour. I think it's so much fun.
Oh, yes, I did. Yeah. Yes, I've been on it, yes.
Yeah. And then that whole, the ghost of the monk that's in front of the Bath Abbey door, right smack dab in the middle. And you could actually Google it and actually see it. So for listeners out there, just Google Ghost of Benedictine Monk, Bath Abbey, and you'll see it. And you will never unsee it. We'll be back with Roger Leitch after this.
Across Bath, Westbury and Warminster, this is Radio Bath.
And this is Brave Business Conversations with Cynthia Wiharja and Roger Leitch. We are still talking about Bath in the old days, the businesses around there, what Bath was like. You know what I noticed, because where we live, just around the corner, we've got a plaque that says Charles Dickens was here. And then if you take a walk around town, Jane Austen used to live here. So Bath also attracted a lot of very famous people. What was the drawing factor? I mean, it was no longer about the Roman baths, obviously. What drew people here?
Well, I think a lot of the plaques that say so-and-so lived here are actually exaggerating. They might have been here for a season and stayed here for a while. Certainly, when you say Charles Dickens lived here, I don't think Charles Dickens ever lived in Bath. He visited Bath. He lived just a weekend, yeah. He visited Bath and stayed at the Saracen's Head pub, and he didn't like it. They didn't give him a room he felt was worthy of his position, and so rarely came back to Bath. And I think he probably stayed where it says he stayed. I think it was just a few nights, and I think that probably applies to other people too. And it was by the time Jane Austen was here, people were living in Bath because it lost its appeal. It was very fashionable for a while, and by the end of the 18th century, it had lost its appeal, and people started coming here to live. And in those days, there wasn't much middle class, but by the end of the 18th century, you were beginning to get a rising middle class. The Industrial Revolution was stirring and beginning to start, and a lot of these middle class people came to Bath, and later on, a lot of retired people came to Bath. And when I was a child, it was renowned for being full of, it was the Admiralty was here, a lot of Admiralty here, and a lot of retired people were here.
Yeah.
And if you go around the churches and look at the plaques on the wall, a lot of the memorials there are to military people.
Right.
Colonel so-and-so and Major so-and-so and what have you. And I suspect, I don't know for certain, but I suspect that a lot of them were, in Victorian times, were retired from the Indian Army.
I see. Okay.
And they would have joined the Indian Army and been out in India for all their working lives, and then they'd come back to England when they retired. And of course, they had no real roots, and Bath was a nice place, and it was fashionable, and they came here.
And I know that there's another city in the north of the UK that's very fashionable. It reminds me a lot of Bath. It's York. Why didn't people was that developed around the same time? Was that a competitor to Bath?
Are you thinking of Buxton?
York.
In Derbyshire?
York.
Oh, I don't know. I've never heard that York was a rival to Bath.
Because it's very similar, isn't it?
I mean, that's quite a nice place, but it's a bit cold.
Oh, yeah, that's true. We've got better weather.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, and then I guess
Buxton's a bit of a rival to Bath.
Mm-hmm.
It has a hot spring, but it only comes out at 25 degrees, whereas ours is at 47. So, it's we do have some edge there.
It wouldn't cure leprosy in Buxton.
No,
you'd have to come to
I
Bath.
don't know.
Roger and I were talking about King David.
Leprosy kit.
Yeah, we don't have a leprosy a center in Buxton, so people have to come to Bath.
No.
Yeah.
No.
And when you grew up in Bath, and when you see Bath now, what are some of the changes? I'm sure loads of changes, but in your own lifetime, what kind of changes have you seen?
Well, it's what do they say? Toujours la change, mais toujours la même chose.
Everything changes, but everything's the same thing.
Yes, that's right. No, but everything's the same. It was funny coming back and going through places that I used to visit as a child. There were lots of ghosts around, although that's died away to a certain extent. It's certainly developed as a tourist attraction, Bath. We have a lot more tourists now than there were around when I was a child. But of course, I was a child in a period when nobody had any money, so there weren't very many tourists anyway. Although the Roman baths were open for tourists, and the Mayor's Guides were around when I was a child, although I didn't know anything about them then. But the Mayor's Guides go back over 80 years.
Yeah.
So they were doing something then. I joke with the tourists that the Mayor's Guides was started by the Mayor's wife, which was true. It was started by the Mayor's wife over 80 years ago. And I joke with them that lots of people retired to Bath and all these old folk were causing lots of social problems, hell's granddads and unmarried grandmothers and frightening the local teenagers. And so they started the Mayor's... Yes, that's right. So they started the Mayor's Guides to give them something to do, as a social measure to keep them off the streets.
So was that a criteria? Did they in your application form, have you been causing trouble? What would you do otherwise if you weren't a Mayor's Guide? And if the answers are satisfactory,
right, yes.
we'll keep them off the streets. let's just have them guide people around the Royal Crescent. Yes.
That's about it. I didn't want to tell you that bit, but
but Bath during the war. So Mayor's Guide was around there, but yeah, that would have been around the war. I mean, I know there was a few where we live. There's a few places where it was bombed because Bath was kind of the revenge that the Germans had, a bit of a revenge because Dresden was bombed. So Bath was bombed because of that.
Well, yes, it wasn't Dresden. I can't remember now. It was a port on the Baltic. But Dresden was bombed right at the end of the war, but Bath was bombed in April 1942.
Oh, so it wasn't because of Dresden.
It was a retaliatory raid, but it wasn't because of Dresden, and I can't remember the name of the port now that was bombed.
Oh, I see.
On the Baltic, and that they decided to go for places which weren't. Hitler said, right, if they're going to go for places which are cultural centres, we'll do the same. And so there were 3 raids over 2 nights on Bath in the end of April 1942. And
but that was it. After that, pretty much.
That was it. Yes. Yeah. Well, there might have been a few. We'd had 1 or 2 bombs dropped by mistake in Bath, and whether there were any after that, I don't know. But that was the raid, the 3 raids on Bath, and that's it. Yeah.
Wow. Well, it's really fascinating. It's really nice to have you on the show, Roger. I love history. I grew up with European history, but I knew nothing about Bath. I visited Bath in the year 2000 when I had a cheap ticket out to the UK, visited Stonehenge, and then part of the day trip was to have a steak lunch in Bath. I can't remember. It was probably around, I don't remember what restaurant it was, probably some touristy restaurant. But I never imagined that I would live here 20 years on. So really nice to hear the stories.
Well, next time your family comes to visit, tell me and we'll arrange a private trip around Bath, a private 2-hour tour around Bath.
That's right. And you'll keep me out of trouble because of that. Thank you very much. Roger Leitch, everyone, when the Mayor's Guide, is there any talk about when the Mayor's Guides are coming back on, or Have they started? I did see some groups in the other day in the Royal Crescent. I wasn't sure if that was it.
The guides are starting again next week.
Oh, good. And we don't have to wear masks, right? I mean, they're all outdoors anyway.
Yes, you'll have to wear masks.
Really?
You have to book in advance. The groups will be quite small and they'll have to wear masks. So how long that will continue, I'm not sure.
You know what you should get? Some of these tour guides have these like little headsets where the mayor's guides don't have to yell it all out. They can just talk, and then everybody's got a headphone that they can follow along. That'll save you a lot of time and trouble, a lot of energy.
Oh, they're all lightweights these days.
Right. Well, thank you very much. It's been lovely to have you on the show. All the best.
You're very welcome. It's been very nice.
This is Radio Bath.